This is an ongoing Wikipedia log dedicated to recording strange and unusual ways in which people and animals were killed. The entries are numerous and span from antiquity to modern day, with the Renaissance and medieval times being prominent middle points as well. Some deaths include Roger Wallace, a 60-year-old auto parts salesman who was struck in the chest by his 5-foot RC plane as his vision was obstructed by the bright sun in Tucson, Arizona. Jane McDonald, a woman who died from falling on an open dishwasher and was impaled by sharp silverware. Li Bai, who was a Chinese poet who became drunk while boating along the Yangtze River and drowned while attempting to hug the moon's reflection. Hannah Twinoy, killed by a tiger in a pub in England, the first recorded person in Great Britain to be killed by a tiger. Clement Vallandigham, a lawyer who was defending a man accused of murder with a gun, accidentally shot himself, trying to prove how the victim may have done the same. And Jocko the monkey, who hanged himself as a supposed experiment after watching public hangings with his owner. Currently, it is not known who started this list or why exactly it was created on Wikipedia of all places to begin with. Although grim, some find entertainment value in these entries similar to 1000 Ways to Die and the segment Stupid Deaths in Horrible Histories. These entries also remind us that nobody is spared from the grasp of the inevitable, be it with or without humor. In Japan, there exists a practice of Buddhist mummification involving the practice of asceticism until and beyond the point of death. This is called Sokunshinbutsu. Some religious scholars believe that this practice was brought over by a Japanese monk after studying in Tang, China, and learning of secret tantric practices. In order to achieve this state, the Buddhist monk would abstain from all food save for the bare necessities and cut out as much fat as possible. He would later halt fluid intake slowly to dry and shrink his organs. Then, he would pass away in a state called jhana, or meditation, all while chanting Buddhist mantras in remembrance of Buddha. Many of these bodies were in the past discovered in northern Japan and are venerated by the lay practitioners of Buddhism in and outside of the country. A famous example of what can be considered Sokunshinbutsu is an over 550-year-old corpse named Sangha Tenzin found in the northern Himalayan mountains in the Gui village temple. Tenzin's body was rediscovered in 1975 when the structure containing him, called a stupa, collapsed. His body was most likely preserved so well due to the cold and arid conditions of the Himalayan climate. One of the altars in the Honmyo-ji temple of the Yamagata prefecture continues to preserve one of the oldest mummies, that of the Sokunshinbutsu ascetic named Honmyokai. This process of self-mummification was mainly practiced in the Yamagata region of northern Japan between the 11th and 19th centuries by members of the Japanese Vajrayana school of Buddhism called Shingon, or True Word. The practitioners of Sokunshinbutsu did not view this practice as an act of suicide, but rather as a form of further enlightenment. The use of this practice was later banned in 1879 by Emperor Meiji. Both assisted and religious suicides are now illegal in Japan. The Wick effect is a phenomenon in which the human body is entirely or partially destroyed by a fire as the victim's clothing absorbs fat and acts as a metaphorical wick, like the wick of a candle. The clothed human body acts like an inside-out candle, with the fuel source of human fat inside and the wick being the clothing of the victim on the outside. Hence, there is a continuous supply of fuel for the fire in the form of melting fat seeping into the victim's clothing. Fat contains a large amount of energy due to the presence of long hydrocarbon chains. Some examples cited in this article are as follows. Michael Faherty, a man from Galway in Ireland who died in December of 2010. Investigators concluded that no accelerants were used and that the open fireplace was not the cause of the fire. The coroner in the case could not identify the cause of Faherty's death due to extensive internal organ damage and concluded that the case fits into the category of spontaneous human combustion for which there was, quote, no adequate explanation. And finally, a larger-scale experiment conducted for the BBC television program QED involved a pig's corpse being placed in a furnished room and covered with a blanket. The blanket was lit with the aid of a small amount of gas. The body then took some time to ignite and burned at a very high temperature with low flames. The heat collected at the top of the room and was hot enough to melt a television. However, the flames caused very little damage to the surroundings, and the pig burned for a number of hours before it was extinguished. On examination, it was observed that the flesh and bones in the burnt portion had been completely destroyed. The Wick effect seems to be a branch off from the infamous spontaneous combustion. However, unlike the latter, the Wick effect is something that scientists believe exists and is often believed to be the real explanation to reports of spontaneous combustion, as science has yet to find a cause for processes by which a human body can generate the heat needed to ignite itself from within without involvement of an external flame. Alice in Wonderland syndrome, or AIWS, dysmetropsia, or Todd syndrome, is a perception-distorting neurological disorder. It was named after the fictional character of the C.S. Lewis classic, as some common symptoms of AIWS are objects appearing smaller or larger and further or closer than they are, akin to what happened when Alice became larger and smaller in parts of the story. The exact cause of this syndrome is not yet known. Some theories point toward head trauma, migraines, viral encephalitis, and Epstein-Barr virus infection, or even high amounts of electrical activity which may affect blood flow in portions of the mind responsible for visual perception and texture. Sardonically humorous enough, Alice in Wonderland syndrome is most commonly experienced by children, although a famous case of this syndrome involves Giorgio de Chirico, an Italian writer and artist whose works often blurred the lines of reality with the frequent use of disproportionate objects in his paintings. Along with visual distortions, other recorded symptoms include audio and temporal distortions where some may hear odd or strange music, normal sounds at different pitches, and a general difficulty with perceiving audio as most others do. The temporal distortions manifest as time moving at a different speed, which may also affect what one sees. A train may seem to be moving at a snail's pace, or a sloth could look as if it is sprinting for its life when moving at a normal slow pace. These symptoms crop up and catalyze the process of de-individuation or derealization in people with AIWS as they become increasingly full of a feeling of detachment from one's own body. Even some reports include afflicted individuals stating that their limbs are disproportionately shrinking or growing in comparison to the rest of their bodies. As Alice in Wonderland syndrome is not a very common case in medical patients, diagnosis is usually undertaken only when other more common ailments have been ruled out. So far, treatment for AIWS is not standardized, with EEGs and MRIs being used in various combinations in attempts to find brain deficits or injuries. As symptoms of Alice in Wonderland syndrome often disappear, either spontaneously on their own or with the treatment of the disease, most clinical and non-clinical Alice in Wonderland syndrome cases are considered to be benign. Leopard Society, Leopard Men, and Human Leopards were names used for actual or suspected secret societies that operated in West and Central Africa from the late 19th to the mid-20th century. Such societies existed in several African regions and were generally independent of each other. One earlier reference to one of them in Western literature can be found in George Banbury's Sierra Leone, or The White Man's Grave, from 1888. These societies were sometimes used in the past to portray Africans as brutal or ignorant savages. This phenomenon of leopard societies spanned several regions of Africa, including Sierra Leone, the Congo, and several portions of West Africa. During field research in the 1960s among the Mano people in north-central Liberia, American anthropologist James Riddell collected detailed statements about the leopard and crocodile societies that had been active in that area, including from former members of said societies. They were composed of men from different towns, and their primary purpose had been to organize trade between these towns, which were otherwise independent political units. Only men who could command the labor of many dependents were allowed to join, as the trade organization and the transport and protection of trade goods were labor-intensive. Those who wanted to join had to sacrifice a member of their own domestic group in a cannibalistic feat to prove that they had sufficiently many dependents whose services they could contribute. The supposed waylaying of travelers was only a trick to hide the connection between the victim and the man who had chosen to sacrifice them. The cannibal feats, on the other hand, were real, according to several old members of the society interviewed by Riddell. Additionally, other accounts from the 20th century detailed men of the societies offering up relatives or spouses, and that only bones remained after the sacrifice and consumption were finished. In Sierra Leone, many warring tribes participated in cannibalism and were dubbed human crocodiles, leopards, and chimpanzees during colonial years. Additionally, chieftains accused groups of participating in these cannibalistic activities. The accused would be enslaved or, in certain cases, burned to death. To this day, certain elements of leopard societies exist, but a particular vein involves the medium of art. You see, a sculpture was in 1913 created by Paul Wizart at the behest of the Belgian Ministry of Colonies. The sculpture depicts a leopard man stalking and preparing to kill a sleeping man. Several people in the Congo were and still are unhappy with the depiction of the sculpture, as they see it as a negative stereotype and inaccurate depiction, but the sculpture still remains in the Royal Museum for Central Africa. This struggle was in 2002 painted into metaphorical reality by Congolese artist Chéri Samba. There exists a Japanese urban legend dubbed The Curse of the Colonel. This legend centers around the ghost of KFC's founder, Colonel Sanders, putting a curse on a baseball team called the Hanshin Tigers. The supposed curse started with a celebration after the Tigers won in 1985. Fans of the team began to shout players' names, and any fan that resembled that player would jump into the Dotonbori River. When one name, Randy Bass, was shouted, the fans realized that nobody quite resembled the European-American look of Bass and decided a nearby statue of Colonel Sanders would do. So, the statue of the Colonel was thrown into the river by fans of the Hanshin team. After this, the Hanshin Tigers went on an 18-year consecutive streak of placing next to last or dead last in their league. Numerous attempts were made to recover the Colonel statue with diving and dredging used as methods, but all efforts failed. Finally, in 2003, the Tigers qualified for the Central League but ended up losing in a Japan Series match against the Fukuoka Dai Hawks. Despite the finals loss, many Hanshin fans were happy enough about the team's performance to once again flock to the infamous Dotonbori River to celebrate. Only this time, more than 5,300 fans collectively plunged into the river. Because of the mass celebration and high density of people on the Dotonbori, a 24-year-old man called Masaya Shitababa unfortunately lost his life by being shoved in by revelers. This death caused the Osaka City Council to construct the Ebisubashi Bridge in 2004 in order to make mass plunges by crazed fans much more difficult. Finally, in March of 2009, the statue was recovered by divers. The divers initially thought it to be a barrel, then a human corpse, but fans were quick to identify it as the long-lost Colonel Sanders statue from 1985. The statue was later returned to its original location. In 2023, the Hanshin Tigers won Game 7 of the Japan Series, their first win since 1985. Fans once more flocked to the Dotonbori River, but this time through a fan dressed as the Colonel instead of a statue. In March of 2024, KFC Japan held a burial ceremony for the statue as they claimed it was too difficult to maintain the statue's condition.